Okay. In verse 6 he says, none of you shall approach anyone who is near of kin to him to uncover his nakedness. Ani Yahweh. The nakedness of your father, or the nakedness of your mother, you shall not uncover. She is your mother, you shall not uncover her nakedness. Verse 8, the nakedness of your father's wife, you shall not uncover. It is your father's nakedness. Make yourself a little note in 1 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 1. Read that chapter in there where he's talking about these people in that place where they go up and they said, a man has his father's wife. He said, man, they do things that even the Gentiles don't do. And yet that's exactly what chapter 18 here in Leviticus is saying don't do. And then Paul got on to him and said, man, you're not upset about it. In fact, you're puffed up and proud of it. What he told them in Corinthians, right? Boy, they were a sick bunch in that place. Verse 9, the nakedness of your sister, the daughter of your father, the daughter of your mother, whether born at home or elsewhere, their nakedness you shall not uncover. The nakedness of your son's daughter, your daughter's daughter, their nakedness you shall not uncover, for theirs is your own nakedness. The nakedness of your father's wife's daughter, begotten by your father, she is your sister, you shall not uncover her nakedness. All of these things are really talking about sexual sins, and you're not supposed to have any kind of deal with anybody. Man shall leave his mother and father and cleave unto his wife, and those two shall become one. You got all of the discussion from Torah, and all kinds of rules and things are established and set down, and in these things Yahweh is telling you this is how you're going to operate. He even covers a lot of things that were never supposed to come into being. And that's what he said about Moses when Messiah came. When Messiah came, that's the Word in the flesh, and he gave us the more pure understanding of what the Torah was speaking than anybody else could ever do. Is that not true? And what did Messiah say? He said, Moses gave you divorce, but it was never supposed to be. A man shall leave his mother and father and cleave unto his wife, and those two shall become one. Not 3 or 4, or 6 or 8. Two shall become one. Isn't that what he said? Even if you look in the scriptures, it talks about, if a man desires the office of something, and he should be what? The husband of one wife. That don't mean one at a time. In verse 12, you shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's sister. She is near of kin to your father. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister, for she is near of kin to your mother. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's brother. You shall not approach his wife. She is your aunt. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your daughter-in-law. She is your son's wife. You shall not uncover her nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your brother's wife. It is your brother's nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of a woman and her daughter, nor shall you take her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter to uncover her nakedness. They are near of kin to you. It is wickedness. Nor shall you take a woman as a rival to her sister to uncover her nakedness while the other is alive. You shall not approach a woman to uncover her nakedness as long as she is in her time of impurity. Moreover, you shall not lie carnally with your neighbor's wife to defile yourself with her. Notice all of these things are being said as Moses is receiving the Torah from Yahweh on Mount Sinai, right? You can't take these things and go back and judge everything that happened before Moses received the Torah. One of the biggest problems in modern Judaism today is they try to interpret everything before by what the Torah says now when it didn't exist. That's where you come up with the idea, well, a lot of things that it reveals in Scripture that they did, it must be all right today. No, that happened, and a whole lot of the things they did is what Yahweh's covering in these instructions of what you can and can't do later. There's places in the Scripture where it talks about during the time of a famine, that women would kill their children and eat their babies, right? Well, since they did it, does that mean that we can do it? Babies become food? No, I'm not trying to be facetious when I say that, but isn't that the way a lot of people think? Because somebody did it and they wrote it down, therefore it's okay for me. But you understand the concept of the thinking. We have to apply the Scriptures where they apply, not out of context. Verse 21, you shall not let any of your descendants pass through the fires applied to Molech, nor shall you profane the name of your El, Ani Yahweh. He said, you shall not profane the name of your Creator. Then he said, Ani, I am Yahweh. And he said what in Exodus? That's my memorial forever, throughout your generations. You shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination. Well, that's pure and simple, isn't it? Nor shall you mate with any beast to defile yourself with it, nor shall any woman stand before a beast to mate with it. It is perversion. Do not defile yourself with any of these things, for by all these the nations are defiled, which I am casting out before you. For the land is defiled, therefore I visit the punishment of its iniquity upon it, and the land vomits out its inhabitants. He's saying right there, a whole lot of these things that he's listed were performed by all the people before, even though he may have brought them in, okay? Even though he may have, been the creator of a lot of them. They still did these things and he cast them out. What happened to the nation of Israel? They were cast out, the land vomited them out because they would not obey what the Torah said. You can't go back before this was written and say, hey, it said that these people did that and it's okay for me and I'm going to do it, because remember, these people were destroyed for doing the same thing. Verse 26, you shall therefore keep my statutes. I think that word keep there, if I'm not mistaken, in the interlinear is in that Shema, I think. 8085 or 8104. Shamar. Okay. You shall keep my statutes and my judgment, not only to keep and to do, but to guard and to obey them. And shall not commit any of these abominations, any of your own nation, or any stranger who sojourns among you. Notice that he got the same law for all people. His people and the one that sojourn with them. One law for all people. For all these abominations the men of the land have done who were before you, and thus the land is defiled, lest the land vomit you out also when you defile it, as it vomited out the nations that were before you. For whoever commits any of these abominations, the persons who commit shall be cut off from among their people. Therefore you shall keep my ordinance, so that you do not commit any of these abominable customs which were committed before you, and that you do not defile yourselves by them. Ani Yahweh Eloheka. I am Yahweh, your creator, is what he's saying. We can't go back now and try to judge all these people by the law that wasn't written at that time. But we can look at it. He said all these people, even though the law wasn't written. We didn't have the Torah before the flood, did we? But yet Yahweh destroyed the whole world with the flood, and he said all those people sinned. Had to have been some kind of a law, or he couldn't say they sinned. Right? Chapter 19. Boy, that's a quick chapter, wasn't it? This would actually be the second portion, that we'd read some other time, because this is Kodashim, the section on being holy or set apart. This chapter 19 here actually contains all of the so-called 10 words of the 10 Commandments listed over in Exodus chapter 20. Okay? The 10 words in Exodus 20, those same 10 things enumerated here, would be considered the essential or the center part of the Torah. These are the 10 things that we're supposed to do, and everything else that Yahweh has iterated in his scripture is so we can keep and perform the 10. I mean, if the verse 1, the first thing says you shall love Yahweh with all your heart, mind, and soul, how do you do that? Can you do that and not do anything he said do? No, so everything else then is given to help us understand how to do and to keep the 10. Being holy or set apart, Kedoshim. And Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, speak to all the congregation of the children of the sons of Israel, and say to them, you shall be holy, for I, Yahweh Eloheka, am holy. You be holy. Just write this down, Ephesians 1:4. Ephesians 5:27. 1 Peter 1, verses 13 through 16. Romans 8:29. All these things go back to that thing where he said, you be holy, you be set apart, because I am. There again, the greatest thing in the world to do is to try to be like, your creator. And remember, he is your teacher, and no one can be greater than their teacher, right? Verse 3. Every one of you shall revere his mother and his father, and keep my Sabbath. I am Yahweh Eloheka. He kind of got, commandments 4 and 5 mixed up there in that one verse. Verse 4. Do not turn to idols, nor make for yourselves molded or cast metal gods. Ani Yahweh Eloheka. I am the one that created you. Don't make for yourself any kind of molded god. In verse 4, the word idols is a number 457. Ha'eh lilim. ha'lelim. It's the word translated idol. The meaning of the word is the good for nothing, the vain or the vanity. The Hebrew says the non-entity. That's kind of like mean that which ain't. The things that have no real existence. Anything anybody sets up as an idol before Yahweh, which includes children or anything else, and people always set things up as idols, including children. You're setting these things up as an idol in front of Him to be destroyed. Your obedience to Yahweh's word can be the greatest witness to your children for them to see that you believe what you say. And if you ever deviate from that, then the first thought they're going to have is, well, I really didn't think you meant it. So you do. And that teaches a whole lot more than just saying and not doing. In verses 5, and if you offer a sacrifice of peace offering to Yahweh, you shall offer it of your own free will. If you offer. See there, we got one more side here. Okay. And if you offer a sacrifice of peace offering to Yahweh, you shall offer it of your own free will. It shall be eaten the same day you offer it, and on the next day, and if it remains until the third day, it shall be burned in the fire. Remember Yehoshua, he said that he what? He has become our peace offering. Remember, you need to go back and look at all these things in the commentary that talks about what he had become. That way we understand that he became and he had become all these things, but it stops us from trying to look at some of these things and trying to put restrictions and things on him that weren't intended. Because the minute we do that, we try to put a box around him and put him in the box and make him fit what we think it ought to be. Verse 7, and if it is eaten at all on the third day, it is an abomination. I think that's into that word abomination there. It's the number 6292. The word in Hebrew is the word pigul. Pigul, it means to stink. It shall not be accepted. Therefore everyone who eats it shall bear his iniquity, because he has profaned the hallowed, or the holy, the set apart of Yahweh, and that person shall be cut off from his people. He has profaned the things of Yahweh. He's going to be cut off. Verse 9, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not wholly reap the corners of your field, nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall not glean your vineyard, nor shall you gather every grape of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. Ani Yahweh Eloheka. Boy, that's got a little bit more than just taking 10% of your crop, isn't it? I mean, there's all kinds of things there that you do to leave for the poor, you know? That had to do with the tithe. Verse 11, you shall not steal, nor deal falsely, nor lie to one another. You shall not swear by my name falsely, nor shall you profane the name of Eloheka, your creator, Ani Yahweh. You shall not defraud your neighbor, nor rob him. The wages of him who is hired shall not remain with you all night until morning. You shall not curse the deaf, nor put a stumbling block before the blind, but shall fear Eloheka, Ani Yahweh. All the time that he says he's trying to help you know you do all these things because I'm the one that created you, nothing or nobody else. You keep setting up all these things, we worship and we bow down and we do homage and everything, yet that's not what created you. The name of the creator that created you is Yahweh. Verse 15, you shall do no injustice in judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor, nor honor the person of the mighty, but in righteousness you shall judge your neighbor. Remember, when he said this to them, when they were living out in the wilderness among all the different tribes, their neighbor was also their brother. And if a sojourner happened to live within a tribe, he became what? Part of the tribe with whom he sojourned. And when he received an inheritance, it was within the tribe that received that inheritance, and he became part of them. He became in the family of Yahweh. In verse 16, you shall not go about as a talebearer among your people, nor shall you take a stand against the life of your neighbor. Ani Yahweh. I've said it. Talebearer. And that's something like somebody who spreads gossip. Boy, all of us need to learn about that and say, we can say things about people. We never should. Nobody. And there's no There's no provocation that can push you into doing something like that that substantiates or sustains or supports what you do. Regardless, and probably all of us have need to, to ask for forgiveness and repent of that at some point in time. Verse 17, you shall not hate your brother in your heart. You shall surely rebuke your neighbor and not bear sin because of him. Oh my. You shall not take vengeance nor bear any grudge against the sons of your people, but you shall love your neighbors yourself. Ani Yahweh. We have problems, and we get into fights, we get into arguments, But one of the problems, the true test, and it's not whether I can keep the Sabbath, or not just because I didn't eat pork chops, or whatever. A lot of these things we can do is real easy. But to sit down with somebody, even though you may have differences of opinion and still get along, it's kind of an ultimate test. Verse 19, you shall keep my statutes. You shall not let your livestock breed with another kind. You shall not sow your field with mixed seed, nor shall a garment of mixed linen and wool come upon you. Now I remember when people were talking and we were trying to learn years ago, and they said, oh, you can't wear a shirt that's made out of polyester and cotton, or polyester and linen. And, why? Well, you can't mix seed. Oh, okay. And then one day you decide to read what it says, and you know what it says? It says you don't mix linen and wool. Don't say nothing about polyester or nylon or none of that kind of stuff. I'm going to show my age, I guess, but there's a few of us here that could probably really remember the old-timey Mott's 5 and dime. When they had the little wood strips, the wood floors and everything in them, and back in the back corner, and generally it was on the right back in the corner. There was a bunch of clothes and sections hanging back there. And up above one of those sections of clothes was a label that said Lindsay Woolsey. Lindsay Woolsey. And those clothes were made of that. And then it had some that were linen and some were something else. But these were Lindsay Woolsey. This verse 19. No mixing. No crossbreeding between animals or species. No mixing of another kind. That another kind is the number 3610 there. It's the word kilayim, which means in opposition to nature. If nature didn't mix it, you don't mix it. Okay? Contrary are dissimilar qualities when you try to mix things that are contrary or dissimilar qualities. You remember he talks about it before. You don't put a donkey and an ox in a yoke and try to put them on a plow. The oxen need a lot bigger, right? He could be pulling the donkey dangling out there hanging on the yoke or something. They ain't pulling their weight. Let's put it this way, okay? One of them gets stronger than the other. This phrase here, nor shall a garment of mixed linen and wool. The phrase mixed linen and wool is one Hebrew word. The number is 8162 if you want to look it up. It's the Hebrew word sha'atnez, and it means Lindsay Woolsey. Isn't it something? And what this is, if you look up Lindsay Woolsey, you know how when you take fibers and so forth and they have these brushes with the metal fibers on them and they put the piece of cotton or the piece of linen or whatever what it is and they start doing all this kind of stuff and it shreds it and makes these long fibers and then take them out and put them on a spinning wheel and they spin them and mix them together, That word Lindsay Woolsey means cloth of linen and wool which are carded together into the fibers and then mixed and spun together. Because the two fibers have different strengths and the material will break down. The other thing to look at is, where does linen come from? From a plant. Where does wool come from? An animal. It's two different things that you're mixing together. Where is the linen supposed to come from? From the flax. And what are the white garments? The righteous garments, what are they made from? The white linen. Okay? Oh my. Well, enough of that. Go back there then, verse 20. Whoever lies carnally with a woman who is betrothed as a concubine to another man and who has not at all been redeemed nor given her freedom, for this there shall be scourging, but they shall not be put to death because she was not free. It's like she was a slave. But now remember, slaves like this couldn't be Hebrew people, Hebrew women. You can't take a slave, which is of the Hebrew, and keep them this way. Slaves other than Hebrews can be kept, and they're even considered property. And when somebody dies, those slaves could be left to somebody else. The scripture says they're still there, like their money. But that's not talking about Yahweh and His people. Okay? The book of Philemon, in the New Covenant commentary, and it talks about this man who had been a slave for this other man. He left, and somehow or other Paul met him, and now he's no longer, and Paul's writing him back, and he says, receive him back to you, but not as a slave, but as a brother. The difference in that whole little book of Philemon is all about somebody who at once was a slave, but now they're not, and they can't be received back as what they were because there's something different. Simple little book, simple little message in it. Verse 21, and he shall bring his trespass offering to Yahweh to the door of the tabernacle of meeting, a ram as a trespass offering. The priest shall make atonement for him with the ram of the trespass offering before Yahweh for his sin which he has done, and the sin which he has done shall be forgiven him. When you come into the land and have planted all kinds of trees for food, then you shall count their fruit as uncircumcised. 3 years it shall be as uncircumcised to you. It shall not be eaten when you plant a fig tree.
That's a hard one.
And you can't eat its fruit even if it's got fruit hanging on it the first year you plant it.
Or the second or the third.
It shall not be eaten, but in the 4th year all its fruit shall be set apart, a praise to Yahweh. I guess they could take all that and give it to the priest, couldn't they? No. And in the 5th year you may eat its fruit, that it may yield to you its increase. Ani Yahweh Eloheka. You shall not eat anything that's implied with the blood, nor shall you practice divination or soothsaying. This divination or soothsaying, we're going to spend a little time here. And in verse 27, you shall not shave around the sides of your head, nor shall you disfigure the edges of your beard. You shall not make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead, nor tattoo any marks on you. Ani Yahweh. Word shave around in verses 27 and 28, it's a number 5362. The root word is nachaf. There is another Hebrew word that means to shave, but that's the number 1548. This word that's translated shave around here is this number 5362, nachaf, and it means to strike with violence. Kind of like if you took some kind of a knife or something like that, and you just had, and you whacked off the hair and a piece of flesh with it. Okay? Now understand, it means to strike with violence. Brown Driver Briggs carries it on through. It says to strike off, to strike off skin. This is referring to the mutilation of the skin around the head. And these are the things that somebody would do, for the dead or for something like this, or to worship some other false god. And we see a lot of kids, young people today that run around, and they got their hair cut off. They got all kind of shapes cut in it and everything. But they didn't cut off skin with it. But what they're practicing is real close to what they used to do for the dead. And Yahweh said you don't have any association with the dead. Okay? The word disfigure is the number 7843 there. Shakaf means to decay, to ruin, to destroy, or to corrupt. So you'll not shave around the sides of your head, nor shall you disfigure, or ruin, or decay, or corrupt, okay, the edges of your beard. If you do these kind of things, and destroy all this kind of stuff, it's not ever going to grow back like it was. It's going to grow back in some disfigured way. It's not going to be like it was intended to be. It's kind of like a little tree that you plant out there, and it's tall and straight, and then some child or something comes along and breaks it off, and what happens? The tree begins to put out different things. And then somebody comes along and breaks off one of them, and that one grows, and it puts out different. And all of a sudden, before you know it, the little tree is growing like everything, but it is an odd-shaped booger. I mean, it's different from what it's intended to be. Okay. I mean, we had that was fun. We had that. Boy, I used that tree for a long time.
Poor little thing
never did grow. In discussion here, this 7843, the word's used in many places. He used it in Genesis 6:11, referring to the earth being corrupted. Okay, when he said the whole world is corrupted, The word is used frequently by the prophets in the sense of moral corruption, and that men have corrupted themselves. That's, The normal word for shave is the number 1548, galak. Go to Leviticus 14. in verse 8, this word galak is in there. He who is to be cleansed shall wash his clothes, shave off all his hair, there's 1548 galak, and wash himself in water that he may be clean. You know, that's in after the leprosy and so forth. So that's actually shaving the hair. This other thing is a corruption, removing skin and everything along with it, disfigured. Now, as we look through there, these verses 26, 27, eating anything with the blood, practice divination, you know, all of these are involved with ancient superstitions and rituals. And remember, these things were practiced in Egypt. And the instructions that he's giving his people now are, you're not supposed to follow things that were done in Egypt. Remember the word Egypt, corruption, bondage, is referring to us coming out of the world. When we come out of the world and start to follow Yahweh, we quit doing the things that they were doing in the world, whatever these rituals are. So a lot of these things are based on superstitions and rituals, and this was designed to stop the practice of sorceries and spells and all that kind of stuff. Now in verse 29 he says, do not prostitute your daughter to cause her to be a harlot, lest the land fall into harlotry and the land become full of wickedness. Do not profane your daughter, or present or teach to her values which cause her to become, that word harlot, become highly fed and wanton. Zana. Mean variable, fickle, wandering for moral rectitude, indulging in sensuality, without restraint, lusting for personal pleasure, becoming hedonistic. They can develop a doctrine that pleasure or happiness is the chief goal in life. I mean, just stop and think, where is our society today? Doesn't Yahweh say that in the latter days men will be lovers of pleasure more than lovers of Yahweh? First time I got a recognition of that was when we were trying to figure out what church we were supposed to go to, and we walked out of church one day and the only thing left in the parking lot was a truck with a boat behind it, and the guy running hard to get to it because he's late. And I think, yeah, that proves that. They're more in love with the pleasure than they were in trying to hear the word of Yahweh. I mean, it's kind of like, you know, you get dressed up and you go to church, you know, and you spend all that time getting ready to go, and then you get there and the preacher talks for 35 minutes and everybody's gone, and you wonder what happened. Like a cubby bust, you know. Anyway. But their chief goal in life is pleasure. Pleasure itself then becomes the idol, and lust for it is a development of idolatry, which is also then spiritual adultery. Okay? I mean, all of these things come back around, and it all goes back. You shall not prostitute your daughter to cause her to be a harlot. It's more than just selling her into prostitution, okay? In verse 30 it says, you shall keep my Sabbath and reverence my sanctuary. I mean Yahweh. Verse 31, give no regard to mediums and familiar spirits. Do not seek after them to be defiled by them. I am Yahweh Eloheka. In verse 31, the word mediums is the number 178. It's a Hebrew word ob, like O-W-B. It means conjuring through chanting, usually a father's name or the repetition of a mantra. What is a repetition of a mantra? You know, used to when they would go into yoga and they'd sit down and they'd assume the position and they'd begin to hum, hum, and then they'd have this little saying, and they get into this mantra, okay? The whole purpose then was to induce the spirits in order to give me some type of good, right? Hey, sometimes they do the same things in the churches. Just before they pass the hat, they get everybody to start singing the same thing. And we sing it over and over, and it becomes a mantra designed to invoke the spirits to cause the people to do something good for me. It's one of those things that happen. The chanting is a formula for invoking the spirits. I guess everybody at some period of time has heard about all these teachings and things that were coming out of different groups about this holy laughter and all this kind of stuff, and people fall down and they roll and they laugh and they bark and they do all that. Anybody ever knows that barking and roaring is like unclean beast? But that's got nothing to do with the word of Yahweh. In fact, if you want to go back and look it up and put in the word kundalini in your computer, and you're talking about the invocation of spirits from another world. And that's where all this stuff comes from. And yet it's made its way into organized religion and become accepted. You know, and also this word medium there in verse 31, it means a ventriloquist. Ventriloquist, wait a minute, that's just somebody who plays with a dummy. I mean, isn't that, you know? But the word venter from the Latin means belly, like B-E-L-L-Y, belly. The locher means to speak, so the word ventriloquist, which is an anglicized form of this venter loquor, means to speak from the belly, or the voice from the belly. Ancient ventriloquists seem to speak from their bellies or from jars which were made from skin, which gave rise to the old sayings and the teaching about genies in the bottle. I mean, we've taken it as a genie in a bottle and put him in a glass bottle, you know, and made her a pretty young girl and put her on TV and called her Genie or something, right? But you go back, the bottles were the skins that were called bottles, and the voice that was in them was some kind of a genie that was in the bottle. This is also known as necromancers. Necromancer is one who foretells future events by conversing with departed spirits. There's a lot of people out there today claiming to follow and teach and talk to departed spirits and all this kind of stuff. Boy, now they doing all kinds of things. I mean, they even got them on Christian television. And these guys, you know, come walking out through a smoke cloud and everything. You know, he's been talking to the departed spirits and all. Anyway. And this word here, familiar spirits, weirds, or spiritists, these all fall in that same number, 3049. And it means the same as spiritualism. Here, in this phrase, the word means those departed spirits that hold intercourse with the living through a medium by rapping or in a trance. We get these people that you know, that hold the seances and the tables and they beat on them, you know, and they hear somebody knocking and all this kind of, and all kinds of stuff. It can also be with sharp blows of the hand, but it can also be done by speaking suddenly and forcibly. That's called rapping.
Really?
Isn't that a neat thought? I wonder where this here rap music comes from. Okay. And then he said that, you know, you give no regard to the mediums and familiar spirits, do not seek after them to be defiled by them. That word defiled is to be made unclean or impure by them. In verse 32, you shall rise before the gray-headed and honor the presence of an old man and fear Eloheka, Ani Yahweh. Oh, we've discussed and talked about that one. You know, if somebody with gray hair walks in the room, everybody else is supposed to stand up. What if all of a sudden here got gray hair? We stand up anyway. Go to Proverbs chapter 20. I guess we got to talk about that a little bit. Proverbs chapter 20 in verse 29. Said the glory of young men is their strength, and the splendor of old men is their gray head. Now, you ever thought about how many old people are trying to dye their hair back black? I mean, they really don't want that glory that comes with it, you know. That glory for somebody else. Not me. Not, you know. I'm not trying to come here. I'm just saying that there's all kinds of people that do all kinds of things, and yet he said that that's your glory. The thing about it is, what if that gray hair came about because of all the bad stuff you've done, and the worry, and the prison, and the jails, and all this kind of stuff, and all of a sudden I got this head full of gray hair, but I didn't get it in a righteous way. That's not exactly my glory, is it? So there is some context here that we have to look at, because all of this in Proverbs is based on somebody walking in obedience to Torah. And except when he says something that this is what's going to happen to them that don't. And most of them that don't are really not going to live to get gray-headed anyway. They're going to die early. Go to Proverbs 16. and look at verse 21. No, excuse me, 31. The silver-haired head is a crown of glory if it is found in the way of righteousness. So, you know, this just because somebody got gray hair and walks in don't mean everybody has to show the people, you know, because they may have not got it the way they should have. The thing about it is, we can't really judge that either, can we? And there's some people here maybe older than us, and they ain't got a gray hair in their head. I mean, if they've thought about that, you know. Well, from a distance they don't show up, but anyway. Okay, going back over in verse 33. And if a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall not mistreat him. Boy, sometimes we can mistreat a brother, but we can't do it to a stranger. Our thoughts, man, you know. Verse 34, but the stranger who dwells among you shall be to you as one born among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Ani Yahweh Eloheka. This even not only mistreatment, but it includes insulting language. Well, that's something to think about. And while we're talking about, you know, this kind of thing here, treating a stranger, I got to tell y'all that we just recently watched a movie. And if y'all haven't seen the movie yet, it's available at Blockbusters. You need to get it. It's called Ushpizim. Ushpizim. It's an Aramaic word and it means guest. G-U-E-S-T-S. Guest. And it's a story about a Hebrew man and his wife who are in the process of trying to celebrate the Feast of Sukkot, but they ain't got a dime. They flattered the flitter. And all kinds of stuff has to happen for them, you know, and then they wind up somehow or other celebrating Sukkot, but not only that, they get 2 guests sent to them. And now they have decided that all this kind of stuff is happening because Yahweh is sending them a test, okay? And I'll tell you what, the movie is something else. There's a lot of things that take place in following Jewish traditions and so forth that you'll learn, you know, based on, you know, some of the things that we've said and everything, and you'll enjoy the movie. You really will. But you'd have to set it up beforehand with the English subtitles because it's in Hebrew, okay? But it's really, if you haven't seen it, I would suggest you get it and watch it. It's really a good movie. Ushpizim. U-S-H-P-I-Z-I-M. I guess. That's pretty close, isn't it? Enough that you can do. Okay. In verse 35 he says, you shall do no injustice in judgment, in measurement of length, weight, or volume. You shall have just balances, just weights, a just ephah and a just hin. Ani Yahweh Eloheka, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe all my statutes and all my judgments and perform them. Ani Yahweh. Now in chapter 20, it said, then Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, again you shall say to the sons of Israel, whoever of the sons of Israel or of the strangers who sojourn in Israel, who gives any of his descendants to Molech, he shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. Molech was a false god built out of some kind of metal who stood up big and it had its arms outstretched. And it built a fire underneath these arms, and people would take their babies and lay them up on these arms and offer them to this god Molech in the fire. What's the difference from that and abortion today? Oh, he's talking about, he's meddling now, talking about abortion. But remember, most Orthodox modern Judaism people believe in abortion. It's okay. Yeah. Anyway, as we go through these, reading this thing, chapter 20, this is the penalties for certain sins, and it explains the purpose of the law, okay, as we look at it, okay? So in verse 2, again, you shall say the sons of Israel, whoever the sons of Israel or the strangers who sojourn in Israel, who gives any of his descendants to Molech, he shall surely be put to death. You see, he just killed a baby. Whoever shed man blood, by man his blood shall be shed. That goes right along with it. But people don't think that. I mean, after all, it's not a real person yet. It's just a fetus, or some other word that we've come up with now to define these things. Verse 3. And remember, this Molech was the chief deity of the Ammonites. So in verse 3 it says, I will set my face against that man and will cut him off from his people, because he has given of his descendants to Molech to defile my sanctuary and profane my holy name. And if the people of the land should in any way hide their eyes from the man when he gives of his descendants to Molech, and they do not kill him, boy, that's a strange one. That's just, right there. But remember, we ain't in the land of Israel. I mean, we in the land of America the Great, the one that says it's lawful to kill babies. So you can't, Verse 5, then I will set my face against that man and against his family, and I will cut him off from his people, and all who prostitute themselves with him to commit harlotry with Molech. Verse 6, and the person who turns after mediums and familiar spirits to prostitute himself with them, I will set my face against that person and cut him off from his people. Now notice he's saying here in verse 6 that if a person turns to those mediums and spirits, then Yahweh's going to cut them off, right? But we go on down in verse 7, sanctify yourselves therefore and be set apart, for I am Yahweh Eloheka. And you shall keep my statutes before them. I am Yahweh who sanctifies or sets you apart. By his Torah is the way this is done. For everyone who curseth his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. He has cursed his father or his mother, his blood will be upon him. That word curses there is 7043. Kalal means to lightly esteem, or to treat with contempt, or to dishonor. So you just lightly esteem them and you're going to be, cursed for it. Verse 10, the man who commits adultery with a man's wife, who commits adultery with his neighbor's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. You remember when they caught the woman in adultery with the man and they brought her to Messiah? And they said to him, Moses in the Torah said that she should be stoned, but what do you say? Moses in the Torah said both of them get stoned. Isn't that what we just read? Mm-hmm. But the scripture said they were really looking for some way to trip him up, to deceive him, so they could kill him, right? What did he do? He wrote down, and it said he was writing something in the dirt, right? I mean, there's all kind of conjecture about what he wrote, right? But can we know for sure what he wrote? Yeah, we can, can't we? Isn't that neat? Let's go over. We'll come back to this verse later. We got to go to John. We may not get as far today as what I thought we was going to get, but anyway.
Your DVD goes open in 15 minutes.
It sure does. We may have to stop. Okay. Anyway, in the Gospel of John in chapter 7, right? Chapter 8, chapter 7. It's in John, right? Okay. In chapter 7, I got to get in John. I keep bouncing from Luke to Acts, but I can't find John. Okay. In John, in chapter 7. In John in chapter 7, in verse 37. This was during the feast of what we called the Feast of Sukkot, or Tabernacles. Each one of the 7 days of Tabernacles was assigned a particular theme, and certain verses of Scripture were read concerning that theme on each of the 7 days. The last day of the 7th day of the Feast of Sukkot, or Tabernacles, the theme of that day was called the Day of Living Waters. So all of the Scripture that was read that day in the Scriptures, had to do with living water. Notice in verse 37, on the last day, the great day of the feast, Yahushua stood and cried out, saying, if anyone thirst, let him come to me and drink. He who believes in me, as the Scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. Remember, all the scribes and Pharisees for years had been reading all the Scriptures concerning living waters on that last day of the feast. All of them been teaching it, right? The ones that was older than the younger have been teaching it longer than the younger ones have, but they all been teaching the same thing. Now in chapter 8, Yahushua went to the Mount of Olives. But early in the morning he came again into the temple. Now the day before was the 7th day. Now this is what? Shemini Acharei, the 8th day, which is also known as what? The feast of the 8th day. Verse 3, then the scribes and Pharisees brought to him a woman caught in adultery. When they had set her in the midst, they said to him, Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery in the very act. Now Moshe in the Torah commanded us that such should be stoned, but what do you say? This they said, testing him, that they might have something of which to accuse him. But Yehoshua stooped down and wrote on the ground with his finger as though he did not hear. So when they continued asking him, he raised himself up and said to them, He who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first. And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. Now they write in there, then those who heard. If we go back to the Hebrew word Shema, those who heard are to hear with understanding. Now, it's to say, who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first. These people were looking for some reason to kill him. That's not going to make them feel bad. But if they saw what he was doing and recognized and understood what it meant, that might make them feel bad. Then those who heard, being convicted by their conscience, went out one by one, beginning with the oldest even to the last, and Yehoshua was left alone, the woman standing in the midst. So the question is, well, what did he do that he was writing in the earth that they understood and got so upset about? And then we got to go to Jeremiah, right? Jeremiah. Where is it?
17:13.
Oh, Jeremiah 17:13. And in verse 13 of Jeremiah 17 it said, now remember, these scriptures concerning living waters have been taught every year on that day, the day before. O Yahweh, the hope of Israel, all who forsake you shall be ashamed. Those who depart from me, isn't that what they've done? They're trying to find somebody to kill him, they had departed from him. Those who depart from me shall be written in the earth, because they have forsaken Yahweh, the fountain of living water. Who is that sitting there, writing in the earth, that they had forsaken? Was that not Yahweh himself in the flesh? Writing the names of those who had forsaken him, and he did it twice. And they understood. And I would submit to you that 99% of the people today who read the Gospel of John or they have no idea or concept of what it's talking about because they don't read the Torah or the prophets. Don't have any idea what it's all about. Okay. Go back into Leviticus 20. We got to get through this, you know. In verse 11 it said, the man who lies with his father's wife has uncovered his father's nakedness. Both of them shall surely be put to death. Their blood be upon them. If a man lies with his daughter-in-law, both of them shall surely be put to death. They have committed perversion. Their blood be upon them. See, we read a lot of these things over in Leviticus 18, but now we're hearing what the penalty is. If a man lies with a male as he lies with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood be upon them. If a man marries a woman and her mother, it is wickedness. They shall be burned with fire, both he and they, that there may be no wickedness among you. He didn't say stone them, he said burn them with fire. If a man mate with a beast, he shall surely be put to death, and you shall kill the beast. You see, the beast, because of the man's action, has been made to sin. Has been made to go against what he was supposed to do. If a woman approaches any beast and mates with it, you shall kill the woman and the beast. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood is upon them. If a man takes his sister, his father's daughter, his mother's daughter, and sees her nakedness, and she sees his nakedness, it is a wicked thing. And they shall be cut off in the sight of their people. He has uncovered his sister's nakedness. He shall bear his guilt. As we read this, understanding the Torah is still for today, and we have a greater and greater daily understanding of what Torah means, and we see this happening in our society today, and all of a sudden it gets more and more ugly as we look at it. And we begin to see ourselves through the eyes of what Torah says, and then we can begin to judge ourselves the way Yahweh sees us. What do you think he's seeing when he looks at you? That's a question we all ought to ask ourselves, isn't it? If a man lies with a woman during her sickness or her, her impurity, and uncovers her nakedness, he has discovered her flow, and she has uncovered the flow of her blood. Both of them shall be cut off from their people. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister, nor of your father's sister, for that would uncover his near of kin. They shall bear their guilt. If a man lies with his uncle's wife, he has uncovered his uncle's nakedness. They shall bear their sin. They shall die childless. It didn't say they're going to be killed. It just said they're going to die childless. You see, that's their sin right there. It didn't lead to death. If a man takes his brother's wife, it is an unclean thing. He has uncovered his brother's nakedness. They shall be childless. You shall therefore keep all my statutes and all my judgments and perform them, that the land where I am bringing you to dwell may not vomit you out. And you shall not walk in the statutes of the nation which I am casting out before you. For they commit all these things, and therefore I abhor them. But I have said to you, you shall inherit their land, and I will give it to you to possess, a land flowing with milk and honey. Ani, Yahweh Eloheinu, or Eloheka, who has separated you from the peoples by his Torah, right? You shall therefore distinguish between clean beasts and unclean, between unclean birds and clean, and you shall not make yourselves abominable by beast or by bird or by any kind of living thing that creeps on the ground, which I have separated from you as unclean. We're not supposed to mate with them or eat them. Either one. And you shall be holy or set apart to me, for I, Yahweh, am holy or set apart, and have separated you. He's saying, I am set apart, I've separated you, you shall therefore be, and I have separated you from the peoples, that you should be mine. Now notice back up there in verse 6 of this chapter, a person who turns after mediums, one who goes to seek the medium, he's going to be what? Yahweh's going to cut him off from his people. But now down here he says, a man or a woman who is the medium, or who has familiar spirits, shall surely be put to death. They shall stone them with stones. Yahweh is going to destroy the one that turns the medium, but you are supposed to stone the one in your midst that has the evil spirit in them. Why? To get the evil out of the camp, is what it's all about. Their blood shall be upon them. And that concludes the reading in the Torah for this day, and we're going to go ahead and cut it off for this day and cut everything off. We're going to go ahead and eat, and then we'll come back after we eat and everything, and then we'll talk about, and maybe if y'all want to, we'll even do the book of Acts. I mean, in those 2 chapters. But we'll cut it off for today, and I thank you for your time and patience. Got to stop. We'll put a different disc in here, maybe we'll just do it that way. Okay. Okay.